Greetings, Rabbi Griscott here with my recap from my sermon from yesterday for the double parsha of Matos Massei. Matos Massei is the longest possible reading there is, a massive double parsha, and at the end of it, we complete the book of Numbers and we say Chazak, Chazak, Vanit Chazek, as we say when we complete any of the 5 books of Moses. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. And it occurred to me when we said that in Shul, I got a bit emotional because it's the first time we were able to say that together in Shul since all the way back in January when we finished the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit. And the reason is because we actually shut down Shul specifically in the week of Vayakel Pekude, the double parsha that ends the book of Exodus. So we didn't get to finish Exodus together. We were like one parsha short, and then the Shul shut down. And then all of Leviticus, all of Sefer Vayikra, we were also shut down. And then most of Numbers. And then finally, the very end of Bamidbar, we were able to come back and say Chazak for the first time in months. And I found that very powerful. But then, almost immediately after, I started to rain on my own parade, sort of internal deliberations. And I thought, wait a minute, have we really earned the right to say this? And I'll give you an analogy for what I was thinking. Every now and then, you read about a marathon that takes place in a particular city. A marathon is 26.2 miles. I'm not exactly sure why. But there's always someone who cheats and sort of puts on the number and puts on their running clothes and drives over to mile number 24, runs the last 2 miles, and they get to the finish line. They say, I did it. And then the news comes out, hey, wait a minute, that person drove the vast majority of the way. And for whatever reason, people are weird. They didn't really run the whole marathon. They just ran to the finish line. Well, the analogy here is we only resumed services last week. So we read two, actually, because yesterday's a double parsha. Okay, three out of the Torah portions of the book of Numbers. I mean, does that really give us the right to say, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, let us be strong? We finished the book because we didn't finish the book together. We finished only 2 weeks of it together. We hadn't started from the beginning. And I started thinking Talmudically, are we allowed to say this formula, Chazak? Is it permissible? And then I sort of calmed myself down and I reminded myself it's just words. It's not a blessing. You're not taking God's name in vain. I mean, the Sephardic custom is actually to say the word chazak after every single time a man gets an aliyah, he comes down from the bima. And Ashkenazim, we say yashar koach, yishar kochacha, may your strength be firmly established. And Sephardim say chazak, be strong. So you really are, of course, allowed to say chazak, chazak whenever you want. But my question internally was, is it legitimate? And then I decided, yes, it is, because it's still a milestone and it's still something to celebrate. I don't know if the Chazak is necessarily supposed to be about that a particular community completed the whole book, as opposed to having gotten to that point on the calendar together, where the book is complete. And so a similar question came up with regards to Simchas Torah. I saw this on social media that somebody posted on Facebook that people are, I think, overly polemical or fiery or angry on social media. And he said, anyone who celebrates Simchas Torah this year is fraudulent. Simchas Torah will be fraudulent because we did not complete the cycle of Torah. There's so many weeks taken off because of the pandemic. You're not allowed to celebrate Simchas Torah. And other rabbis weighed in and sort of said, okay, calm down. Simchas Torah is not necessarily about any particular shul having completed the Torah cycle. It's about getting to that point in the calendar where the Torah cycle renews itself. I think most of us would intuitively say that as well, and so you do have the right to celebrate. But I think other than these sort of cute, overly technical discussions, I think there's a psychological mechanism underlying them, and that is, do you choose to view things that are happening during this pandemic in a pessimistic way or an optimistic way? If you want to be pessimistic, you could always rain in the parade and say we've lost so much, and now we don't even have rights to celebrate milestones that come. And if you choose to be optimistic, you choose to see the bright side and to say, nevertheless, in spite of all the challenges, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, be strong, and may we be strengthened, because we need to be telling ourselves that now more than ever. That's what I said in shul yesterday, that I had originally thought that the pandemic lockdown would last a few weeks, and then life would go right back to normal. And we see that, in fact, we're in this sort of transitional odd phase where you have to wear masks and sit distance, and there's no kiddush, and the service is much shorter. National synagogue organizations are giving guidance to make the service shorter to lessen the chance of exposure. There's no kiddush afterward. There's no socializing. It feels kind of weird. It felt weird in this transitional phase. Is that something to celebrate? Is that a milestone to celebrate, or do you say we don't celebrate until life returns to normal? And I advocate that we do actually have to celebrate every milestone we can take, even if it's not a complete redemption, so to speak, that we had originally envisioned. The very last verse in the parsha yesterday, before the Torah, before we say Chazak, reads, Eila hamitzvot v'hamishpatim asher tziva Hashem b'yad Moshe el b'nei Yisrael barvot Moav al Yardeni reichel. These are the commandments and the ordinances that Hashem commanded through Moses to the children of Israel in the plains of Moab, at the Jordan, by Jericho. The last word, the parsha, is Yericho, Jericho. And Robert Alter in his commentary points out that that word points forward to the book of Joshua, because Jericho is the very first city that Joshua and his army conquered when entering the land of Canaan. As the old black spiritual song goes, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down, encircled Jericho 7 times, blowing the shofar. The walls dramatically come down. So this last word, Yericho, points forward to the conquest of Canaan, and this verse sounds like it's the end of the Torah, or at least it should be. These are the commandments, and they were at Jericho. They're almost there. And then there's a whole other book, an epilogue, the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. Moses has a final valedictory sermon, or a string of sermons. I always joke, if you think your rabbi's sermon is too long, read the book of Deuteronomy. It's Moses' final address in the last few weeks of his life. So we're not there yet. You'd think of the last verse yesterday, oh, we're about to enter the promised land. Not yet. It's delayed once again, delayed another few weeks for the reader. And this becomes a theme of Jewish life, the idea of the promised land being so close, tantalizingly close, and then being told, wait a little longer. There's a little more to do. There's a little more to say. Redemption has to be delayed. And that's the emotion that I think I was feeling in shul, and I think that we were all feeling. But to invoke another group of people in yesterday's parsha, the daughters of Slavchad, who are mentioned again. They were first mentioned last week in Parshat Pinchas, and the parsha mentions their story again in order to reiterate certain technicalities of law about them. But Rashi has a poignant comment about the daughters of Slavchad. Who are these daughters? They were 5 sisters with no brothers, and they said, why is it that only boys can inherit their father? What about in a situation like ours where there is no brother? And Moses said, that's a good point. I'm going to take your question to God. And God comes back and says, you have a good point. Okay, in that situation where a man dies without any sons, his daughters inherit the land. And rabbinic tradition sees these women as very righteous. And Rashi points out that they are emblematic of the women of the desert generation in general, because the men of that generation were all punished by dying out before reaching the age of 60. And it was actually only the men. The Talmud clarifies that. And that's made explicit in yesterday's parsha, where it says, Kol ish, every man had died before reaching the age of 60. The sin of the spies come back, 10 out of 12 of the spies give a bad report about the land of Israel. And the nation at large accepts it, or at least the men accept this pessimistic view. And they say, let's go back to Egypt. We're not ready to conquer this land. But what do the daughters of Tzlafchad do? The exact opposite. They're already thinking forward to the land of Canaan. They're already thinking of how to divvy up the land. We want to inherit. We want to fulfill the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of settling the land of Israel. And so they were complete opposite of the men. So the men said, let's go back to Egypt. And the women said, I'm ready for Canaan. I'm ready for the promised land. And I already am thinking of how to divvy up the land. And Rashi sees that as emblematic of the women in that generation in general, who are more enthusiastically looking to the future. Whereas for whatever reason, the men were too scared. We've been learning Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, and Ezehu Chacham, it says, who is wise, Haroas, Hanolad, he who is able to see the outcome of a particular action. And I would say, you could also paraphrase it as he who is able to keep his eye on the prize, to keep his eye on that redemption that is coming, even though it's not here yet. And so that's what I would exhort us all. A redemption from the pandemic is not yet complete, but it's very Jewish to accept a partial redemption with faith and with joy, and to say, nevertheless, we'll take it, we'll take what we can get, we'll keep our eye on the prize, we'll keep our eye on the promised land, even though we're not there yet, just like the daughters of Slavchad, who had that level of faith, and to indeed say, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, which we really need, that exhortation now more than ever. Be strong, and may we be strengthened.